Welcome, everyone. My name is Cecilia Urman-Bietova, and I'm the faculty advisor for the School of Economics Econ Club, as well as ODE, the chapter of ODE, which is an International Economics Honor Society. We're very happy to see a lot of you live, and hopefully some of you, or maybe many of you, online later on. We are recording this meeting and we'll be posting it later on. So just an FYI for those of you who are with us online right now. This event is shared widely through the cooperation and partnership with the Atlanta Economic Club, as well as a number of participating schools here in Atlanta. The partnership is called Economic Collaborative of Academic Atlanta Area Academic Institutions, ECOI. And the participating schools include Georgia Gwinnett College, Georgia Tech, GSU, Oglethorpe, and Spelman. So some of you are from those universities. I do recognize a lot of names. Some of the names I don't recognize. The Atlanta Economics Club is supported by Atlanta Fed, so we're very happy to work on this partnership. And as our first event, we're kicking off the semester with a discussion, hopefully friendly discussion, well, definitely friendly discussion on the differences and similarities of the three different master degree paths. And so with that, I will give the floor to our wonderful student leaders, Rupkatha and Shamita, who will introduce both groups as well as both speakers.
All right, hi everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm the representative from ODE, and I'll talk a little bit briefly about kind of what ODE does and what our aim is. And we're hoping to get chartered this semester, but as Dr. Yu mentioned before, it's an International Economics Honor Society, and we want to provide students with pathways and resources if they're looking to pursue graduate careers in economics, and give them some more insight on research and pursuing like upper level academia in their field and their subjects. And we did another one of these informational sessions for PhD or prospective PhD candidates in the fall, and that was super successful. So we're happy to do this again to talk about kind of other graduate programs that students can pursue as well. So with that, I'll hand it over to Shamita to talk a little bit more about Econ Club.
Hello, everyone. I'm the representative for Economics Club, and welcome to all of you from our Georgia Tech community and those who are from other places. We're really thrilled to have you here. So for Economics Club, the caveat with it is that it's a club that supports people who love economics from all walks of life or all walks of majors. For example, I'm primarily a physics major, but I adore economics and added it as a secondary major. And through this club, I've been able to experience different events and speak with different people who have the similar fascination that I do. So we like to support different events by hosting different speakers, having different moderative events, things like that. And speaking of which, we do have an event that's coming up soon with Mike and Tyler Haswell of Exploring Your Financial Personality on February 18th. In addition, we have internship panels and a few different conversations with other people who are in support of the economics community and are experts in their field. We're hoping to have a Federal Reserve tour soon in March. Of course, COVID being another caveat towards that situation. But we are thrilled to have you here and supporting this group and our collaboration with ODE. So thank you for joining us today, and we look forward to our speakers.
All right, so I'm going to start off by introducing our first speaker, Dr. Meenan. So Dr. Peter Meenan has taught economics at the master's level in the Georgia Tech Economics Department for the past couple of years. And he's going to be providing insight for us on potential master's programs and MBA programs that students want to be looking into. And he received his PhD in economics from Purdue University and an MA and BA in economics from Fordham. And he has a chartered financial analyst certification. Dr. Meenan is retiring this May as a principal and transferring pricing economist at Deloitte with 11 years of experience abroad. And Dr. Meenan and his wife have one son who's a junior in Auburn's aviation program, and they also have 3 golden retrievers. So thank you so much, Dr. Meenan, for joining us today. And we're so excited to hear about all the insight that you can give us about MS and MBA programs.
And then I will take the floor and introduce Dr. Sleeper. Dr. Sleeper is our representative for the pre-law program, and he is the director of Georgia Tech's Law Science Technology program, including pre-law and IP certificates. He was also one of the first 10 graduates of the Public Policy BS, so we're especially thrilled to have that. He's worked with students interested in law degrees before, which is very popular for economics majors and very insightful for that. So if you are exploring that avenue, this would be a perfect opportunity to ask those questions. In addition, Dr. Sleeper has much experience with professional ethics and medical ethics, and he enjoys spending time with his partner Matthew, and they also have a dog, a Staffordshire Terrier Lily, with the name Lily. And so we are very excited to have you here. Thank you so much for joining us, and we look forward to your presentation.
All right, so I think kind of the way we're going to structure this is we'll pose each question to the group, and Dr. Meenan and Professor Sleeper, if you could both give us your insights on kind of like the specifics pertaining to a law program or an MS or an MBA program for each of the questions that we're going to go through. And some of them are more like overarching questions about how to choose a program that best suits us, and then some of them will be more specified, like what kind of work-life balance does each kind of program provide. So I'll go ahead and kick us off with the first question. So our first question is, how does a student select a graduate program, law or MS Econ or MBA, that kind of best aligns with their interests? And what do you think are the kinds of questions that they should keep in mind during the decision-making process in determining these programs?
Do you want to go first, Chad?
Mm-hmm. I can, yeah, if you'd like for me to. So with a law program, I think, one thing that you're looking at in choosing whether you want to go to law school or whether you want to do something else is think about what your end goal is with your career, right? And that's not to say you have to know every move you're going to make for the next 40 years, right? But after you get out of law school, what would you like to do next? Or after you get out of whatever graduate program you go to, what would you like to do next? And think about what you really need to get there. So many students come in to me, right, for pre-law advising, and they want to go to law school. When we really start talking about what they want to do, they may or may not need a law degree to do that. And so it's starting to think about, right, do you want to spend 3 years of your life, a whole lot of money, a whole lot of time and energy on a law degree, or is there another degree or another type of preparation that might be better? So I think that's one thing to think about. Obviously, if you want to be a practicing lawyer, you need the law degree, right? But it's something to really think about is what the end goal is. What is the degree going to do for you on the other side of it? And you ask kind of what questions to ask. And that's a really broad question, but I think, some of the things that I encourage people to think about if you do decide to go to law school is think about where you might want to practice. Law is one of the few professions that's very geographically specific, right? You have to pass the bar in the state that you're going to work in. So think about where you want to be. If you don't know where you want to be, you might want to go to a more national law school that's going to teach you kind of general common law and all that. So all law schools do to some extent, but the bigger law schools, the bigger names are going to teach things much more broadly, and their names will be recognized where you end up, right? If you know you want to be in Atlanta, think about schools that have alumni networks here. Think about what your specialties that you're interested in might be. And I say specialties because you don't have to decide going into law school, but know what some broad areas are you're interested in. And then pick law schools that have a deep bench of faculty in those areas, not just one professor who teaches. If you're interested in health law and they have one prof who teaches health law, that's probably not a great place to go because you'll exhaust their course options pretty quickly. But if they've got 3, 4, 5 professors who teach health law, or better yet, a center for health law or something like that, right? That's a great place that you'll really be able to dig into what you're interested in. So those are just a couple of things that I would think about. There are lots of others too that are common with what you did in undergrad, size of the school, location, all that stuff. But just some things that I think are more specific to law school.
The first thing you said, Chad, really, I'm glad you said that because that was on my mind. Quote that I like is, if you do not know what port you're sailing to, no wind is the correct wind. So to the extent you do know what your ultimate objective is, it makes the decision a little bit easier. Although having said that, when I think back way back when I got my master's in econ, I didn't know enough about what my opportunities might be to really say I wanted one or the other. And so my decision was, since I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do, I chose a master's in econ because I thought I knew I would advance my career at least. So in other words, I was enhancing my human capital, and I knew that job opportunities would be enhanced because I chose, a master's of econ. In this particular case, Masters of Econ, MBA, or a JD, all three would certainly or very likely enhance, your career opportunities. So, in that respect, you are unlikely to make a mistake, right? So that you're probably getting a better return on investment, if you will, than not pursuing one of these three tracks. Another important thing for me was I needed money. I didn't need money, but I didn't want to go into significant debt. And I found, and I think it's still the case, that a master's in econ is much more likely to have associated with an opportunity for a stipend. I had a fellowship where I was paid through my master's, and then ultimately when I was in the master's program, I decided, yes, I can do a PhD. I'm actually smarter than I think I am, and my professors in the master's program helped me think about where to apply for a PhD and how to do that and how to get that sponsored. So, that's a little bit different. Where a master's in econ, you probably have a greater likelihood that you could get it sponsored or a fellowship or a scholarship. That's less likely in an MBA, and I suspect in a JD, less likely as well, right? So you would need the financial capacity to be able to pay for an MBA and a JD if those were the routes you chose. More likely you could get a stipend or some kind of, sponsorship in a master's program.
I want to add just two things to that real quick before we move on. One is around the financial aid piece, which you mentioned, Peter, and I think that's so important that you know about JD programs, right? Is when you apply for law school, your application for admission is also your application for financial aid at the vast majority of schools. You still have to fill out the FAFSA and all that stuff too. But what they'll do is they'll send you a letter offering you admission or not, right? And if they offer you admission, there will also be an outline of your financial aid package there. And whether that's going to be all student loans or whether it's going to be a combination of loans and scholarships. And there's some other scholarship programs usually at each school that you might apply to separately. And these are usually the full rides, right? But law schools don't operate on the same kind of research assistant system that a lot of graduate schools do. So just be aware of that, right? You're going in with the tuition being what it is, and it'll be some combination of loans and scholarships that get you there. But it's typically not a research assistantship. You can do that later on to work for a law professor and make some extra money, but it typically doesn't count towards your financial aid. The other thing I wanted to mention was just kind of in choosing between a law degree and other things, share a tiny bit of my story, right? I wanted to do medical ethics. Coming out of Georgia Tech, I wanted to be a medical ethicist and do clinical ethics stuff. And at the time, I needed to do a fellowship after law school or after whatever I did next to do that. And those fellowship programs required either a PhD, an MD, or a JD. The MD was out. That was not me. I don't deal with bodily fluids and blood and all that stuff. So that wasn't going to be me. So it was a PhD in bioethics or a JD, right? And for me, and this is not the right decision for everyone, but for me, I felt like the JD was more flexible. You often hear the term, you can do anything with a law degree. I don't agree with that 100%. You can't do surgery with a law degree. You can't do a lot of things with a law degree, but there are a lot of things you can do with a law degree. And so I thought, if I don't get one of these coveted bioethics faculty positions somewhere, at least I'll have a JD instead of a PhD in bioethics, and I can support myself, right? And at one point in my career, I had to do that. I had moved back to Atlanta. I got that faculty position. I got that fellowship out in Houston. And after about 4 years, I needed to come back to Atlanta for family reasons. And I came back, got an academic position here, directing a program at Emory Law School, and the recession hit. And my program was eliminated along with a bunch of others, right? And I needed to fall back on my JD finally. And I took the bar exam 5 years out of law school so that I could go start practicing law. And that's what I did for 7 or 8 years, was to work in law firms. And so for me, it provided that cushion, that flexibility when I needed it. Would I have maybe found the PhD program in bioethics more interesting? Possibly. But I wouldn't have been able to get a good paying job potentially, when that other line of work went away during the recession. So for me, I liked having that flexibility of the law degree. And that was part of what got me there instead of in a PhD program.
Well, bouncing off of those comments, how do you decide the balance between money and passion when you're choosing these different programs? They're both essential and you both touched on them, but I was wondering what your thought process is when you're deciding that.
Go ahead, Peter.
I do apologize. You broke up a little bit when you said, how do you decide between
these different programs, such as pursuing an MBA or a PhD or going for a JD? How do you decide between money and passion which one you value more, or do you find a consensus between the two of them? How do you go about making those decisions?
The first thing that comes to my mind is, and again, I'm heading towards retirement, so I'm at the stage of my career where I'm looking back over what I've done, with Deloitte and before that as an academic, and I can say I've absolutely loved my job, and to me that would seem a very important criteria, which is, what is inspiring me, and so I'm going to be going into some sort of graduate program. Will I be inspired? Will I be challenged? Do I feel like I can't wait to open the books and learn a little bit more today or tomorrow? So the first thing that comes to my mind is, I would very much want and very much recommend that passion and love of what you're doing is a very important component of that decision. Even with my master's and my PhD, and sort of, Chad, you kind of echoed the same as your career had changed. I didn't know what I would be doing through my master's, and when I got my master's, then I decided to get a PhD. But I knew I loved economics. I knew I could do something because I was looking at the area and I found, look, this is so relevant to life and my perspective on everything. I'm sure I can get a job after that, and I'm sure I can be successfully rewarded. But again, first and foremost was I was passionate to learn it. And even today, I don't feel like I'm done learning economics, even though I've done it for a greater portion of my life. So that was, again, the first thing that came to my mind is, if you're waking up and the last thing you want to do is crack open that particular book and you hate the subject, that wouldn't seem to be so great.
Yeah, and I agree completely. And it reminds me of a question I often get from students when they are undergraduates early in their career is, what major should I choose to best prepare myself for law school, right? And law schools, thankfully, don't have any one major that they prefer. And they really mean that when they say it. I know sometimes students come to me and say, but would I really be better off if I did this or that? They really don't care. They know that lawyers can come from a variety of different backgrounds and be successful lawyers. And so they really want you to do what you want to do, right? And I would say the same, kind of echo what Peter just said around your graduate degree program. If you're passionate about what you're doing, if you care about it, if it excites you, if you get out of bed in the morning ready to go learn. I remember taking my first internship in clinical ethics after knowing I was already kind of interested in this, right? And I was working at MD Anderson Cancer Center out in Houston, where I ended up joining their faculty later on. And in that internship, I was there for a summer in law school. And I was going into, I'm not a morning person, but I was going into work at 7:30 every morning because I jumped out of bed excited to know what I was going to be dealing with that day. And if you feel that way about whatever the program is, it's going to make it that much easier for you and you're going to thrive in it. And if you thrive in it, you're going to be successful down the road. And, the money will come. I think the question was phrased as money or passion, right? If you're passionate about what you do and good at what you do, the money will come. If you make the decision based on money, you may find yourself miserable and not being so successful at what you do, right? And also, if you're looking at law school, I would say take a look at average salaries for lawyers. They are lower than you think. Don't think that going to law school, getting your JD, is a ticket to the six-figure income immediately and all that stuff. It is not. So you really do have to enjoy it and love what you do, because the lawyers we read about, right, who make those top salaries, that's not everyone. So, I would definitely go with passion in this particular case.
I think this gives us like a good segue into maybe a conversation about like work-life balance when pursuing both of these graduate programs. So I remember I was interning at the ACLU a couple of years ago, and there were a lot of like 1L and 2L like law students talking to undergrads about like what the experience is like, because a lot of the undergrads going into this internship program were really interested in pursuing law school. And they were telling us about, we had this like very glamorous idea of what it's like to be a lawyer. And they were telling us about how oftentimes lawyers work like over like 40-hour work weeks, like even like later in their careers. So that's kind of what I can speak to, because that's some advice I've heard on my end. But can you both tell us a little bit more about what work-life balance looks like in like both of these career pathways, like following maybe like getting a JD or following getting an MS or an MBA in Econ?
Well, an MA in Econ or an MBA, it of course very much depends ultimately on what career path you may choose. For example, if I think about, in years past, a very popular option for, top MBA school students was investment banking. And that certainly has a reputation of working 80, 100 hours, very similar to sort of the billing hours required at a top law firm, right? If, very simply, if you're going to get a top salary coming out of your graduate program, we know it from economics, right? It's called the value of the marginal product. So you're producing revenue, you're producing value of the marginal product for your employer. They're going to expect a high return to pay you that high salary. And, in a law firm or, investment banking, some other MBAs or, consulting kind of jobs that you might get out of a master's program, they'll expect significant amount of work and effort, billing over, for example, 200 hours, which means you may be working, a 50 or 60-hour week. So now, I will say at Deloitte, we do hire a lot of MBAs and master and undergrad econ students. We're not working those hours, and we don't do a lot of traveling. So, certainly nobody's working 40. I think it's beyond that. I'd say 50. But in general, I hated working weekends, and I wouldn't expect any one of my team members, except in an extraordinary situation, to work the weekends. But partly that as you're in the grad school, one of the important things to do is to gather information about different career paths. Also continue to assess what kind of work-life balance you want and what other attributes in a job you may want, and then gather that information, right? So one of the really good things about graduate school is you all have the ability to liaise, have internships, further think about, right, what will I face post school, and start to gather information about that. So apologize, I didn't really answer the question black or white, but it is very much a depends question. And as an economist, right, that's of course what I always say, it depends.
That's what we say in law school classes too, right? So the right answer, my torts professor told us, is always it depends.
It depends. So, never commit. Yeah, don't make an opinion if you don't have to. Right?
Yeah, and I think it's true here too in law, right? So I think what you described, right, from the students that you were talking to, the law students you were talking to, can very much be what a law career looks like, especially in those first few years. Although, if you remain in big law for your entire career, you can expect those hours to stick around the whole time, right? It doesn't get easier as you make partner. If anything, it gets harder. I think people have a misconception that you make partner and everything, all of a sudden it's just going to lunch with clients and not really having to do the work, right? gosh, you have your billing requirements plus client development at that point. So, it can be a lot. I just took out my calculator when you asked that question, and I took the average, not the average, but a typical billable hour requirement at a big firm, which is 2,000 hours a year that you bill. So remember that you can't bill everything you do. If you go to the bathroom, if you have lunch, if you do other things, you're not billing it, right? So if you divide 2,000 hours by 52 weeks, so that's not even taking a vacation, that's 38.4 hours a week you need to bill. So you can do the math, right? You're going to be, if you take a week or two vacation, you got to have those hours banked. If you're, doing other things during the day, if you take an hour to go do something else and not work, take that out. So this is why you see people working, and particularly in big law, 50, 60, 70, 80-hour weeks when they're getting started, right? And they're getting their feet with the billable hours system. It's not for everyone. And I think what we see is that, you need to take a look at the different settings you can practice in. If you want to go with big law, you're going to be dealing with these billable hours. If you want to go with a mid-sized law firm, you may or may not be dealing with these billable hours in the same way, right? They may have different systems. They may have, I know of a firm here in town that allows you to bill whatever you want to bill. They don't have a requirement, but then you're paid based on what you bill too. And I have a couple of friends who work there, and they love it because they get to set their schedule. If they want to really bust it one year, they can do that, and they can make a little more money. And then if they want to scale back the next year, they can, and they don't get in trouble for it, right? And then, there are people who go solo, and that has its own set of demands, right? It's not the billable hour structure, but you're the one keeping the business afloat. So it depends on what you want to do. And then there are people who go in-house, and some people go, it's becoming more common actually to be able to go in-house right out of law school sometimes. But it's still a little more common to get some experience with a law firm first. Law firms are great training grounds. So a lot of people go in with the idea that I'll work for this law firm for 5 years. I'll pay off some of my student debt because I'll be making that big salary. But I know that I'm not going to have a huge social life during those first 5 years, right? So there are some trade-offs there, and you can think about how you want your career to look. I would agree totally with what Peter said. Learn about your career options while you're in law school if you choose law school, right? Because then you can get a feel for which path do I really want to take. Do I want to do that, or do I want to do this? And what do those attorneys do? Specialties can make a difference too. If you want to be a litigator, a lot of your schedule is going to be dictated to you by a judge, right? It's going to be when you have to be here for certain things. And judges work with you. They try to make sure that, the hearings work with your schedule. And if you have a vacation blocked, they hopefully won't conflict with that. But sometimes push comes to shove and you just have to be there when you have to be there, right? Whereas if you have other specialties, think about things like maybe compliance or things like that, maybe it's more of a 9-to-5 type deal. So it really can vary based on setting of your practice and based on the type of specialty you have.
And on that note, we do have a question from the chat. Allison asks, question for master's programs. Can you talk about the pros and cons of being a full-time student as opposed to working while completing your master's, which they believe is more common for MBAs? Would both of you please comment on that?
Of course, some of the main differences going full-time versus part-time, one is you're getting done quicker. If you're full-time, right, you're managing, I would argue, a simpler life in some ways, right, because it's all academic focused, where if you're working, right, and I did have one of my employees also took my class last semester, and I knew how busy he was at work, and then all of a sudden he's got to write a paper and take the final exam. And I know he's absolutely getting killed with various priorities, right? So I think one is that if you're going full time, it allows you to concentrate on the academic subjects more. But of course, that may mean you incur more debt. On the other hand, working means you will not finish as quickly. you may find that your time pressures to study and focus on the academic part becomes that much more difficult, right? Because oftentimes school is a second priority to the things you must get completed at work. And for example, if you're lucky enough to have your employer actually pay for the schooling, right, then you have sort of that additional commitment to your employer as well. So.
With law school, I would say unless you're going to a part-time program, and there are a handful of reputable, good part-time programs out there. Georgia State has a long-standing part-time law program. Unless you're going to a part-time program, I would not recommend working, at least during your first year of law school. And it used to be that the American Bar Association actually prohibited it. I believe those rules have been loosened a little bit, but I still think you have to like disclose any work to your law school if you're working in your first year, and it has to be kind of under a certain threshold. The first year of law school is very intense. It's when you're getting all your core courses in, those are the grades that law firms end up using to compare students to one another, your first year grades. So the first year of law school is a, a very intense process. I remember feeling like for the first few weeks at least, I had just enough hours in the day to do everything I needed to do. Wake up, eat breakfast, study, go to class, eat lunch and dinner, maybe have a chat with my parents on the phone some days, and then go to sleep, right? But what's good about law school is it gets better after the first year. Second and third year are much lighter and get better. So during those times, I think working is a little more feasible. I still don't know that working full-time is really possible during law school if you want to go through law school full-time as well, because it really is a full-time job.
Yeah, see, and I'd say in the master's program and the MBAs, going part-time would be much more common, right? So and I'm thinking, as you noted, Chad, right? I'm always thinking after the first year, are you in law review? And, and there does seem to be a greater pressure in law school than in an MBA or in a master's in econ program on ranking the students after the first year. And it does seem to somehow situate you for the rest of, the law degree. And that, I think that's less so in either a master's program or an MBA program. In fact, in some, right, you see like executive MBA programs and returning students. It's very common in the MBA schools where students are going part-time. And arguably there's some benefit from that because you're learning stuff in the classroom that you may be able to apply at work, and it allows you to bring that extra dimension and different understanding from a different perspective in the relationship between work and the MBA.
All right, thank you so much for that. So I kind of want to pivot now back to kind of talking about how you know whether or not you're a good fit for a program, to give students more insight about, what exactly to consider and like what to parse through in determining what they want to do in terms of pursuing a graduate program. So would you say that there are certain kinds of skills or background or certain background that helps students in pursuing a specific kind of program? And if so, could you kind of elaborate on what those would be?
Well, the first thought in a master's in econ is, similar to many of the undergrad programs, right? Having a good quantitative background is likely very important. I'm not sure the universe of master's programs will be quantitatively rigorous, but I would say that's probably the rule rather than the exception, that you should have good quantitative faculties there. In an econ master's program, right, you are sort of specializing in, the economic skills, and by that I mean, if I compare it to an MBA, right, an MBA is more of a generalist in the broad areas of really economics, right? So if you think of marketing, right, is really applied demand theory, or accounting and finance is the application of different cost theory principles that we might cover. And the curriculum there would be much more broad, much more general than you would typically see in a typical Masters of Econ program. And so, having an ability to a broad base of knowledge, flexibility across subjects would seem to be more important, for example, in an MBA program, where there's a higher degree of, I think, specialization and I don't know, let me say consistency, I would think, in a Masters of Econ program.
I think, when I think about law school and what makes a successful law student and someone who's a good fit with a law program, I think about a few things, and some are very simplistic sounding, but do you like to read and are you a good writer? If you don't enjoy reading a lot of material over time, don't go to law school, because that's what you're going to do, is read every day, hundreds of pages, right? If you're not a good writer, and be honest with yourself on this one, right? If you're not a really strong writer, it's not something that you're going to enjoy, because you're going to be forced to write everything, right? That's your grade in law school for every course, is one written final at the end of the course for the most part. And they're starting to make some changes in law school, because that's a pretty draconian way to grade. But that is how most law schools still do things. So, be really honest with yourself about whether you're a good writer. Then looking at your analytical skills, right? You've got to have very strong analytical skills, and most students coming out of Georgia Tech do. One of the things that I think is one of the greatest skills a lawyer has, and kind of our superpower, is to disaggregate problems, right? To take a complex problem that a client's having or that you're working through with someone and identify all the different parts of that problem, and then address each part one by one, and then be able to put it all back together in a way that makes sense and present that to people, right? It's a really, really important skill. And it's one that I learned at Georgia Tech in a lot of different ways, but perhaps the least obvious, but one of the most important courses I took at Tech when it came to going to law school and being successful in law school was my required computer science course, CS 1301. And back then we didn't have different courses for Ivan Allen College and Scheller and all that. We all took the same CS class. I was terrified of it because I was a public policy major, did not like programming, didn't like any of that stuff. And I took that course that I had to take. I put it off to like the summer after my junior year because I was terrified of it. I ended up kind of enjoying it, and I did well in it. And when I got to law school, I realized, and I had a bumpy start to law school. My grades weren't where they needed to be my first semester, right? Because it wasn't the way I was used to thinking. But when I started to take like my CS history from Tech and say, hey, if I break these problems up into pieces, just like I did with the CS problems, and address each piece and then put it all back together, that's what lawyers do, right? And I was doing better when I started to do that. The other thing that I would say is you have to be interested in a lot of different aspects of law. So if you're just interested in closing deals, right, that's all you want to do with your career, and you already know that you want to be involved with big M&A deals between companies or something like that, and lawyers are certainly one piece of that, right? But when you get to law school, you're only going to enjoy that contracts class and that business associations class, and you have zero interest in torts and constitutional law and civil procedure and criminal law and all those things, then that's when you might want to think about maybe getting at that goal from another angle. Because when you go to law school, you have to study all those things. It's not optional, right? Your first year, you're taking a general law course. It's like becoming a doctor. When you become an MD, right, you don't specialize at first. You do that later on, but you have to have that whole background at first. And it's the same with law. So if you think you would really hate, maybe you think you could hate one, and that's not so bad. But if you would hate 3 or 4 of those things, then you need to start thinking about that, right? Whether it's the best fit for you or not. But if they're all interesting to you, and right, the underlying themes of justice and our political system and all that are interesting to you, then you'll probably find them at least somewhat interesting, even if it's not the class that's right on point with what you want to do.
Chad, when you're talking, it triggered another thought in my mind. Another way perhaps to think about this and evaluate would be once you're evaluating a program or a school or a different track, is to look at the type of companies that might be interviewing and what sort of job offerings are available, right? And that might help, for example, when you were saying, Chad, if you might not want to do this area or that area, that'll be important in the first year. But another way to look at that is what sort of qualifications are employers looking for once you get out? And, it sort of seems like the next phase, right, of your suggestion, which was very good.
On that note, I wanted to ask another question about how do you need to have a specific policy in mind or any specific specification that you're looking for when you're entering into these programs? And if you do have a specific policy that you want to change or want to be involved in some certain movement, which program would be the best to pursue for those ideals?
Well, I'll say a little bit about law schools and how they view that, right? Because it's a conversation I've had with a lot of deans of admission from some law schools that we deal with a lot with Georgia Tech students. And from a law school perspective, it can be a little bit of a catch-22 because they want you to have goals. They want you to know what you're interested in. They want you to know what you plan to do with the law degree. They also can get a little scared if you're too narrowly focused on that goal and if you have tunnel vision towards that goal. And the reason being kind of what I was just talking about in the last question, which is they start to worry, is this person going to be able to handle all the other stuff we're going to make them do that's not focused on this one goal, right? So I always advise students when you're applying to law school and when you're thinking about law school, right, be open-minded. And I think that's a trait that you need to have as a potential law student if that's the route you decide to go, because you are going to have to learn all these different things. So you may be interested in a particular social justice issue, and maybe you do need a law degree to do that. And in that case, fantastic, right? But if you're interested in like patent law, let's say, and that's all you talk about in your application and you don't show any openness to the other areas of law and learning about them and possibly engaging with them, that can put off a law school a little bit. Not completely maybe, but a little bit, because they might think, this person's not going to thrive, particularly in the first year, right? Because they're not going to enjoy or engage with the other things they're going to have to do. So a little bit of a catch-22, I think, and not a satisfying answer, but I do think that's one thing to think about if you decide to apply to law school.
I was thinking one important attribute for MBAs is typically working within teams, right? There typically are a lot of team projects. I was wondering, Chad, is that common too in law school? Ability to work as part of a team. It's less so, arguably, in a master's of econ, but I think in general critically important in an MBA curriculum and maybe also in law school.
Yeah, so I would say, unfortunately, it's not as important in law school. That's changing to some extent, right? Because I think the legal profession has realized this about how we educate our own, to realize that it's very much a free-for-all independent contractor kind of model, right? Where everybody's out for their own grade and you're not working in teams. You're filling in that final exam at the end of the day. So independent work gets you a long way in law school. When that shifts a little bit is if you get involved with things like law review in your second and third year, where you're working as part of a team to put out a journal, right? And law review journals are the journals in the legal field. There are arguments about whether that's smart to have students kind of as the judges of law professors' work, right? But that's the way that it works in legal academia. So if you're going to end up on law review, you will be working more in a team. If you work with a clinic, there are opportunities to do that in law school where you get some clinical experience through supervising attorneys within the law school. You'll work more in a team in that setting. When you get out of law school, oh my gosh, 99% of you are going to be working in teams. So it's a critically important skill that I think law schools haven't done a great job of teaching, and they're starting to realize that and try to reframe legal education in a way that emphasizes it a little more. But in terms of your grades, you you need to be more comfortable with independent work in law school, because it's really going to come back to just you as far as your grades and your performance in class.
I just wanted to add one point, going back to the original question, which is I think in general, an MBA curriculum would be fairly standardized across many schools, although some schools will offer specializations or an ability to minor, or some schools will have some degree of expertise and specialization that may be important to pay attention to. I would think of the choices, MBA, law school, or a master's in econ, probably the master's in econ might have the greatest diversity in different schools in terms of ability to specialize, combine a minor with your master's degree, and that goes back to sort of the original comment. To the extent you know what you might want to do when you graduate, it makes that choice a little bit easier, choosing potentially a specialization and maybe with an area of expertise with a minor, for example.
So going back to kind of what Professor Sleeper said about team building, and kind of shifting gears a little bit, can you both speak to how a student would kind of go about or navigate finding connections in each of their respective programs, since maybe each of these, kind of like the way each of these graduate programs has been framed isn't necessarily the most conducive to teamwork, as we kind of mentioned. So how would a student how would a student navigate making connections and networking in their programs?
That's a fantastic question. And with law school, and this is probably the same, Peter, with master's programs and MBA programs, one thing that happens is, even though in law school you're being judged on your own work product, you're in this really high pressure environment with people with similar interests to you, and you bond really quickly. You become really close friends with the people in your first year class. And what happens in most law schools is you'll be split into sections by the school, and you will take pretty much all of your first year classes with that same section. So depending on the school, that can be anywhere from 30 people to 60 people, 50 people, somewhere in 30 to 60 range typically. And you will get to know those folks very, very well, right? My first year section was about 25 students, and we kind of split into two groups, and it's not that the groups didn't get along, it was just kind of this natural split of 10 or 11 of us who really got along well, and the other 10 or 11 who really got along well. And I'm still close friends with those people today, right? And realize that going into grad school, and particularly to law school, is you're not just meeting your classmates, you're meeting your colleagues for the rest of your life. You're meeting the people who are going to feed you job leads later on. You're meeting the people who will be best man in your wedding and stuff like that later on, right? These are people who are going to be really important in your life. So I don't want to scare you by saying it's so independent, because this team is kind of built in. But then also, building study groups. Just because it's your work product that needs to go out at the end of the day doesn't mean you can't study with others, right? And that's really popular in law school, to have study groups. I didn't do enough of that my first year because I was used to being very independent at Georgia Tech. And I wish I'd done more of the study group thing. But having study groups, being a part of those, is really important as well. Getting involved to the extent you can with extracurriculars. It's more difficult, frankly, in law school because you're busier, you have more to do with school, so you don't have as much time. But if you can find one thing that you love and do that, you'll meet some other folks who are like-minded and start to kind of build those connections too.
And the only thing I'd add is a lot of MBA programs will also foster teamwork and working as a team. Certainly at the executive MBA level and the more senior MBA programs will be very much team-based. I would think it's harder if you're going part-time, right? Because you just don't have the ability, to your point, Chad, to volunteer for different clubs and network and associate, and your timing to do studying may not align with others who you might want to team with. I actually don't know so much in the econ master's sort of curriculum. Maybe I don't know, to put you on the spot, Dr. Yu, is there, is there, at Tech, do we have a means for the master's students to socialize and get to know each other? In my classes, some of the students do seem to be friends working together, but I don't know if that's just by the nature of the students seeing each other in class, or there's something more organized within the department.
Oh, good question. I wish I were a little bit more privy to what is going on right now at the master's level in our program, but in general, so a qualifier, I actually did get a master's degree from Georgia Tech in economics, in addition, to a couple of other degrees. But this degree in particular was by far the favorite for me, because it's a very small school and very cohesive in a way that everybody seems to think alike. We like the methodology, we really enjoy math and, the mathematical way of thinking about the problems and everyday decisions. So from that perspective, I think that because the faculty we didn't have a lot of faculty, we also didn't have a lot of students. It was a very small group of people who interacted with each other literally every day. So I got to know my classmates really well. We took all the classes together. I keep in touch with some of them, not all of them, primarily because I think for some of us, it was kind of like an intermediate step to where they wanted to go. And I personally went into public policy, getting my PhD there. Most of my classmates continued to do some of them actually went to the Econ PhD, and a whole bunch of them started working as consultants, in fact. So one person went to State Department, interestingly enough. But we did have a very strong, cohesive communications, and we studied together. We spent a lot of time in the lab in Habersham building at the time. That's where we were located. Currently, I would guess that the program is working very hard. So director of the master's program, Usha, I know that she's putting a lot of time and effort to develop a sense of community and develop events that are geared specifically for our master's program. And certainly any events that we can do, since I'm working mostly with undergraduate students, events like this are also open to grad students. I'm not sure if that's, translates quickly and efficiently over to all of the students in our department. But they're certainly more than welcome to participate. And I guess one last thing I should say is that we do have a number of classes that focus on teamwork. So we may not spend a lot of time as an MBA program or even BBA program, that just a lot of teamwork, or a lot of classes are based on teamwork. But we do have a number of upper level classes in particular that are focused on teamwork. I hope that helped.
On that, we do have another question from the chat. Riley asks, what do you believe is the ideal timeline to follow for law school admissions? Also, what are your opinions on the GRE versus the LSAT?
Sure. So for a really detailed timeline, and I'm not going to go into huge detail here, but you can visit our website, prelaw.gotech.edu. We'll bump you over to the Law Science and Technology Program website. And there is a timeline there. I think we call it, so you want to go to law school or something like that, right? And you click on that, and it'll take you through what you should be doing your first year, second year, third year, fourth year at Georgia Tech. All that being said, right, there's kind of an assumption in that timeline that you're going straight through from your undergraduate program to law school. And if you go straight through like that, you want to be taking the LSAT, typically your summer between third and fourth year, and I'll talk about the GRE versus LSAT in a second. But take the LSAT the summer between your third and fourth year, then apply to law schools during your fourth year. So there are other things you need to do prior to that, right? Getting letters of recommendation from different folks, getting your personal statement worked out. But ideally applying to law schools then the fall of your fourth year. And the law school admissions process is a rolling process, so you want to get your applications in early, right? get concerned for students when they come to me about now, and it's the first time I'm hearing from them in that academic year saying, I want to apply to law school. Well, at this point, law schools have gotten most of their applications in, and they're starting to make admissions decisions. They've already been making admissions decisions, and there are just fewer spots left in the class. So you want to ideally start your applications in the fall. Then in the spring, you get to get those letters back, those wonderful acceptance letters, hopefully, right? Letting you know where you're going to end up going, potentially. So that's the basic timeline. A lot more details at prelaw.godtech.edu on what to do in each of those years. The GRE versus LSAT. So for those of you who may not be familiar with this question and why it's a question, law schools have a law school admissions test, the LSAT, that's been the law school admissions test for decades. They've more recently started accepting the GRE as well. Some of them, they don't have to, but some of them have started accepting the GRE as a substitute for the LSAT. And the reason they do it is they recognize that you may be making these very decisions we're talking about tonight, right? You may be deciding, am I going to get a master's in economics or an MBA or a law degree? And so they want you to have some flexibility, and they will accept a GRE score from time to time. You need to check the law schools you want to apply to and make sure that they would even accept a GRE score. Many will not. A lot of them will, but many will not. So make sure that your law school would accept it. If they would accept it and you're looking at, do I apply for the GRE or do I take the GRE or do I take an LSAT, then it depends on a lot of things, right? If you know you want to go to law school, I will tell you that the LSAT is still informally viewed as the test, right? That's the test you want to take if you know you want to go to law school and not one of these other programs. If you know that you want to get a master's degree and a law degree, you want to do a joint program, maybe you decide to take the GRE because you're going to need it anyway for that other program, so you might as well take it and have it count towards your law degree as well. If you're unsure, that's a good reason to take the GRE. Another reason is if you've played around with practice tests and you're really having trouble with one versus the other, then maybe you look at it and say, well, which one am I going to get a higher score on? And if that's the LSAT, I'll take the LSAT. If it's the GRE, maybe I need to look at schools that accept the GRE because I think I'll have a better shot there, right? So it's really kind of individualize that decision. I can't give you advice one way or another across the board, but based on your circumstances, you might decide to take one or the other. And those are some of the basics that you might want to consider.
All right, I think actually that was our last question. So thank you both so much for your insight and everything, like all of the information that you've given us. I'm sure this was like very, very helpful for all the students attending and determining like the programs that they want to pursue if they want to choose between a law program or a master's program. So thank you both again.
Yes, and I would like to thank you and highlight especially the emphasis that you put on the passion and love for doing things that you really want to do and follow that, not the money. And also the fact that you are choosing people you're going to be interacting with for a very long time, most likely for the rest of your life, in terms of the personalities, the characteristics and things that you are doing. So that decision is quite important. So thank you so very much, Chad and Peter, for giving a very detailed and enlightened conversation on all of these pluses and minuses and comparisons between the three programs. I'm certain all of our students found it very interesting. I also would like to invite our students to connect with you directly if you don't mind, whether in social media or via email. I am certain we can easily find you. If you feel like popping your email addresses into the chat, that would be great as well. So our students can jot it down, and with that, we can safely call it a day and close our meeting.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you so much.